Artificial intelligence is an invention which its impact is still yet to really be felt. A bit like electricity, we have something we don't quite know what to do with, and are experimenting as best as we can to find a use for it. Unlike electricity, it won't take 2 centuries to invent the light bulb after its initial discovery. This man-made tool can write, make pictures, animate things, analyze, speak, and process material at a phenomenal rate. Although it makes errors, the temptation at the moment is how this tool might be used to put as many people out of a job as possible, a bit like the Luddites during industrialization. But just as the Luddites tried to resist the destruction of their livelihoods by machines, so too are Neo-Luddites attempting to fight the argument that human intelligence and talent is not to be devalued in the face of artificial intelligence. Quicker is not always better. The present limitations of AI are already starting to fall into view. The arts and employment are the main talking points so far on this great debate, but so too is AI having an impact on the field of history. There are already reports of students using AI to write their essays for them, and equally lazy historians using AI to write their teaching resources, amongst other misdemeanors. Yet at the same time, these people have been using it for practical purposes, such as helping with their research, digesting vast amounts of data, and brainstorming ideas. In the popular sphere, and especially on YouTube, several videos have been made about the impact of AI on history. The Pharaoh Nerd has spoken in his video about the sheer amount of lazily made AI-generated short videos which use inaccurate history and bizarre and misshapen imagery to express this dross. He has also shown that many are simply clickbait myths peddled as facts by irresponsible snake oil merchants who are only interested in how much advert revenue they generate. The feckless people responsible for this rubbish are thoughtlessly ignoring the damaging effect of selling lies as truth and giving a false impression of the facts. Another aspect of the impact of AI is discussed in the Feral Historian's video, Biggs and the End of History. He highlights how AI creates a morass of data, some fake and some genuine, blurring the line between the two. He also emphasizes the unreliability of people's memories and how they can very easily be corrupted by time and seemingly convincing data. In this video, I want to see how good AI currently is at writing a script for a history video, the quality of it. To do this, I have picked a topic, the Emperor Justinian II, for it to cover. I will review its ability to examine this Eastern Roman emperor and critique it.
In the long and storied history of the Byzantine Empire, few emperors had a reign as dramatic and as turbulent as Justinian II. His rule was marked by ambition, brutality, exile, and an astonishing return to power. Today we delve into the extraordinary life of Justinian II Rhinometos, the emperor who lost his throne, his nose, and yet still clawed his way back to reclaim his Byzantine crown.
It has adopted a style which flows quite well and would easily make for a good start of a video.
Justinian II was born around the year 668 AD, the son of Emperor Constantine IV. He was brought up in the corridors of power during a time of great military and political upheaval. When his father died in 685, the young Justinian ascended the throne at just 17 years old. Despite his youth, Justinian was ambitious. He inherited an empire under constant pressure, from the Umayyad Caliphate in the east, Slavic tribes in the Balkans, and internal dissent at home. His first reign would be defined by both military campaigns and a fervent desire to assert imperial authority.
What it says about his early life and rise to power is generally correct, and it would serve very well as a preface for his early life.
One of Justinian's first priorities was to deal with the Arabs. He initially secured a favorable peace treaty with the Umayyads, which increased the annual tribute paid to Byzantium, but this peace was short-lived. By the early 690s, hostilities resumed. Justinian launched military operations in Armenia and Anatolia. Though not always successful, his aggressive policies showed that he was no mere figurehead. He also turned his attention to the Balkans, resettling Slavic peoples in Asia Minor to serve as military colonists.
So the AI is correct that Justinian's first priority was to deal with the Arabs. It doesn't say anything about why this was or anything about the Arabs' situation themselves. They were fighting a civil war, so it was very easy for Justinian II to exploit that. It is partially wrong that he increased the annual tribute paid to Byzantium, because it was this treaty that established that tribute in the first place, which was 1,000 solidi, 1 horse and a slave every day of the year for peace. What this doesn't mention this is slightly wrong about the peace being broken in the 690s. In 689, Justinian II attacked Syria again, and because of his success in this, he was able to adjust the treaty, allowing him to gain control of Armenia and also the Caucasus, the kingdoms in the Caucasus, Albania and Iberia, as well as Cyprus. What it has attempted to do is squeeze all of these events a bit clumsily into a few sentences. So you can see that it's gathered this information, chopped a few bits out, and then put what's left in as the video. But what has been lost is that some of the facts around it are incorrect. It has failed to make an accurate summary of the events it's trying to condense. So it would have needed to completely change its approach in a way, or get its facts right.
But it wasn't just on the battlefield that Justinian sought control. A devout Christian, he imposed religious uniformity with a heavy hand. He convened the Quinisext Council, also known as the Council in Trullo, in 692, which issued a raft of new church laws. Many of the decisions caused friction with the Roman Church in the West, worsening the already fragile relations between Constantinople and Rome.
It's pretty much spot on about the Quinisext Council and also his approach to it, so that one's pretty good.
Despite some successes, Justinian's rule became increasingly autocratic and unpopular. He raised taxes heavily to fund his military and building programs. The population, especially the aristocracy, grew restless.
His two ministers, Stephen and Theodotus, were very good at collecting taxes, but of course, the one thing that people don't like is taxes being collected. So, in fact, it's Justinian II's reign where the senatorial aristocracy essentially disappear. Was that because of Justinian's reforms and policies? Partially. Also just because of the time with the empire under siege and most of the empire being turned into a war zone, the ability to actually maintain these great senatorial estates had basically evaporated. So you have the impoverishment of the aristocracy during this period. People having Roman naming system of having free names, and the senatorial aristocracy completely disappears. Partially talks about, but doesn't really tell you the impact of it on a more societal level.
His treatment of dissent was brutal. He used torture and execution freely, and his secret police gained a fearsome reputation. Discontent brewed, particularly among the elite and in the capital. In 695, the resentment reached a breaking point. A general named Leontius led a coup, storming the capital and deposing Justinian. But Leontius didn't kill the emperor. Instead, in a moment of theatrical cruelty, Justinian's nose was cut off, a symbolic mutilation meant to ensure he could never rule again. He was exiled to the distant city of Kazone, in modern-day Crimea. Thus began one of the most remarkable episodes in Byzantine history.
It doesn't tell you who he's torturing or who he's executing. And in fact, there's quite a lot of debate about whether or not this happened at all. It would be wrong to use the word secret police in the Roman Empire. Emperors operated through agents, but they didn't have a secret police force, so this is a very apocryphal way of putting it. It tells you that the discontent was growing, but not why. And a lot of the reason stemmed from three things. One, a big military defeat in 692 at the Battle of Sebastopol, which this hasn't mentioned, where Justinian tried for a third time to invade the Islamic Caliphate and was beaten this time. So he lost all of his concessions, which he got from the two previous invasions, lost a substantial portion of his army, and also his second-in-command, Leontius, imprisoned, who was a strategos. He also had the councilman Trullo, which annoyed the church, which it mentioned, and also Stephen and Theodosius, as mentioned, although were very competent, were incredibly unpopular. So by this point, 695, Justinian II is an incredibly unpopular person. He'd been using a lot of money to fund building projects, fund his wars, fund his reforms, but this all resulted in everyone hating him, and there was a big rebellion where Justinian, for whatever reason, freed Leontius, sent him to become the governor of Hellas, and Leontius rebelled. There was a coup, and Justinian was deposed.
For most deposed emperors, exile was a death sentence, if not literally, then politically. But Justinian was made of sterner stuff. Even maimed and cast out, he never gave up on reclaiming his throne. While in Cassone, he began plotting. When the local authorities caught wind of his plans, they tried to arrest him, but Justinian escaped across the Black Sea, seeking refuge with the Khazars, a powerful Turkic people in the region. The Khazar Kagan, impressed by Justinian's boldness, offered him asylum and even married him to his sister. But Byzantine agents eventually convinced the Kagan to betray him. Once again, Justinian escaped, this time killing the soldiers sent to murder him. He fled west to Bulgaria and secured the support of the Bulgar Khan Tervel. In 705, Justinian returned to Constantinople, not as a fugitive, but at the head of an army. Under cover of night, he and a small band of followers scaled the Theodosian walls using ladders. They opened the gates from within. The city fell with barely a fight. After 10 years in exile, Justinian was emperor once more.
This isn't quite true. They didn't scale the walls of Constantinople with ladders. Justinian and a small group of men climbed through the waterway of the damaged aqueduct of Valens, which took them over the walls and into the city, and then from there they opened the gates. So this has invented something which isn't actually true, and has skipped over the far more interesting story of using the aqueduct as the way into the city. Otherwise, it's a very good summary.
Justinian's second reign began with acts of revenge. Those who had wronged him, Leontius, Tiberius III and countless others, were rounded up, publicly humiliated and executed. The same streets where he had once been jeered were now drenched in blood. He rewarded his ally Khan Tervel with the title of Caesar, the first time such a title had been given to a foreign ruler. Yet despite some military successes and the satisfaction of revenge, his rule again descended into tyranny. Justinian had become even more ruthless, and this alienated many who had initially supported his return. His heavy-handed rule made enemies at home and abroad, particularly among the elite. In 711, just 6 years after his triumphant return, rebellion erupted once more. A general named Philippicus Bardanes led a revolt with support from the Eastern army. This time, Justinian could not escape. He was captured and executed, along with his young son, Tiberius, who had briefly been co-emperor.
Yes, so it's correct that he acted like most emperors would. They started by having retribution on the people that got rid of them. For instance, in the reign of Zeno, although he had to placate a lot of the people who originally had got rid of him, he systematically, over the course next few years, ended up eliminating them all. Like Amatus was executed and his son Theodore Strabo was killed. Verena was also eliminated when she rebelled against him. So, although Justinian II's retribution was bloody and brutal, probably not unexpected. And yes, he executed Leontius, Tiberius III, who were both emperors. Countless others may be a bit of an exaggeration, because the main people that his retribution fell upon were Leontius and Tiberius's closest supporters, which probably only a few dozen people. But those people were administrators, officers, experienced professionals who were in charge of running the state. He also blinded the patriarch, which was also rather shocking.
Justinian II's life reads like a tragic epic, full of ambition, violence, resilience and ultimate downfall. His return to power after a decade in exile is one of the most dramatic comebacks in imperial history, but his legacy is deeply mixed. He was a capable military leader and administrator, but his cruelty and inability to reconcile with political opponents doomed both his reigns. His obsession with power and vengeance blinded him to his need for compromise and consensus. He was the last emperor of the Heraclean dynasty, a lineage that had ruled since the early 7th century. His fall marked the beginning of a more chaotic era in Byzantine history, characterized by rapid changes of rulers and increasing foreign threats.
It talks about him being heavy-handed and ruthless, but in much the same way that this doesn't give any examples, the historian Constance Head also points this out, that a lot of the sources that talk about Justinian II and how ruthless and bloody he is don't actually give any examples, and the examples they do give are typically restricted to a single source writing much later. So, for instance, in his first reign, it is said that he had the remaining 10,000 Slavs in his army annihilated, but after the Battle of Sebastopolis. But Theophanes is the only person that mentions this. He is writing much later, and in a practical sense, how would Justinian II do this? So, with sources much closer to the time not mentioning this, such as Nicephorus I, who was drawing upon the same source that Theophanes used, we have to wonder if Theophanes is actually telling the truth. And Constance Head's reaction was no. And these bloody stories about Justinian II are very likely propaganda from the regime of Leo III, the founder of the Isaurian dynasty, justifying his rise to power through the evil of Justinian and the righteous fall of the Heraclean dynasty. Also, because there were 3 usurpers in between Justinian II and the rise of Leo III, it's possible they had already started to build up the story of Justinian II being a tyrant who was evil and should have been removed to justify their own rise to power, particularly Philippicus, who's the one that had Justinian II executed. In his second reign, apart from the executions at the beginning of his reign, which far more likely happened, multiple sources mention that it did, and also it actually gives examples such as the Patriarch and the 2 emperors being executed. The only other time that Justinian II unleashes his retribution on people is when the city of Ravenna revolts against his rule, and although the reprisals against them were very ruthless and bloody, they had rebelled, and there was a justification for the use of extreme force in that instance. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. And Justinian II, particularly in his second reign, in contrast to what this says, is far more willing to compromise than in his first reign. So a good example of this is when he and the Pope meet to discuss the dictats of the Quinisex Council, and Justinian II actually agrees to remove certain clauses which the Pope is unhappy about to placate the Catholic Church. And so Justinian is a much better, much more balanced statesman in his second reign, but the situation is so much worse by this point because you've had a decade of foreign attacks, the political instability, the loss of North Africa, various other issues in those 10 years since Justinian II's been out of power. So when he comes back, there are so many more issues he needs to deal with, and the empire is in a much worse situation.
In many ways, Justinian II was a man ahead of his time, visionary in ambition, but ruthless in execution. His life reminds us that power in Byzantium was never secure, and that even the most dramatic returns can be short-lived. He ruled, he fell, he returned, and he fell again. Few stories in imperial history are as gripping, or as tragic, as that of Justinian II.
What it's written, it's quite a fair summary and conclusion it's made. It has made quite a few errors, and it certainly gives you a old-fashioned impression of the reign of Justinian II. Peter Crawford has actually made the point that Justinian II, although he was competent in both of his reigns, less so in his second reign, but there are still failings there, that Justinian II is just not up to the job of ruling the empire at this period in time. Like, his father was a incredibly talented person and just about managed to cope with the invasions of the caliphate against his increasingly shrinking realm. And Justinian II had a lot more breathing room than him and struggled. It's a bit more of a mixed bag for him. So there is talent there, and also there are mistakes which he makes which kind of show that his abilities were not quite the same as his father's. But also the challenges he was facing were not exactly that far removed from the challenges that Constantine IV did. I'm going to ask the computer to tell me exactly what primary sources and scholarship it used to make this video.
It says, I won't tell, that would be cheating.
So this is quite interesting. I appreciate that it's actually laid out very clearly what it used for primary sources, and it's given you a very good English translation, the one by Cyril Mango and Roger Scott. This is the standard scholarly translation of Theophanes. I appreciate that it does point out its bias, although I have had to ask it to do this. It hasn't brought it up in the video script. So this is not... And then it comes to this, and it's not as useful for Nicephorus. Like, Nicephorus is a very important source for this period, and it doesn't give you the name of the edition and translation by Cyril Mango. So, available in some compiled translations, though less comprehensive than Theophanes, isn't a very useful thing if I'm trying to work out how to read the work of Nicephorus. Liber Pontificalis. Again, it doesn't mention a translation. There's a translation in the Translated Text for Historians series by Liverpool University Press. There's another translation of the Quinisex Council in that same series, Translated Text for Historians, Armenian and Syriac sources. So it's done okay to give you a few sources, but then some Armenian chronicles mention Justinian II in relation to Eastern campaigns. It'd be very useful, Mr. AI, if you told me exactly what Armenian chronicles.
I won't tell, that would be cheating.
There is the history of Gawond. There's the Syriac source of Theophilus of Edessa, which we have today as a compendium of other sources, including Theophanes, Agapius, who's a Arab Christian from the 9th, 10th centuries, and also Michael the Syrian and the Chronicle of 1234. That's a Syriac source. Arabic historians such as Al-Tabari provide insight into the Umayyad perspective on Byzantine Arabic intentions. Where is the translation? Where is the separate entry? But otherwise, those are all correct. It hasn't just drummed up a source that just mentions Justinian. Modern scholarly works. This is a good book about Byzantine wars, and it talks very much about the military history. We don't really see any of that translate into the script, so I wonder how much this was actually drawn upon to inform that essay. Warren Treadgold's History of the Byzantine State of Society is very detailed and a very good general work. It is slightly dated now, since it's been 30 years since it was published. George Ostrogorsky, again, very good general work, significantly dated by now. This is 40 years before, this is from 70 years ago. Judith Heron, another general work, a bit more thematic. John F. Halden's Byzantium in the 7th century is, as it says, very good for social, military, and administrative changes. There is a bias from John Halden, who, when he wrote that, because he does it through a Marxist's lens, which I don't know how applicable that structure of analysis is when constructing the history of the Eastern Roman Empire. I don't see how that has translated into this essay. And finally, Walter Kaiki, Byzantium and the Early Islamic Conquests, which is a far more specialized work about this period. Something to note is two books which are notably absent from this are the two works about Justinian II himself, who Constance Head's work from the 1970s, and also Peter Crawford's book from 2021, which are specifically about Justinian II and incorporate all of this scholarship into his work. And had those been drawn upon, or some of the discussions used from there may have been better, or even just using Warren Treadgold's book, you're going to get a more detailed version of what's happened than here. I can see that this has taken this information and attempted to square it away, and it's, as I said before, it's removed some information to try and condense it down into all these nice segments, but it has, in doing so, made lots of errors, and it's left a huge amount out. So actually, the impression you get from this is a kind of vague, wishy-washy idea of Justinian II's reign with a inaccurate impression of his reign based on a traditional view pre the historiography of Constance Head, which has been accepted by scholars and shows it in Peter Crawford's book, where a very good analysis of his reign, which I understand, in 1,000 words, this can't go into the same kind of detail. If I was using this as a tool to try and synthesize that book into a pithy video for YouTube, I would like it to include the historiography, the history, and the accurate information as much as it could into that script, and then turn that into something which is both current and far more usable and far more interesting, moving forward the discussion. This, on the other hand, I think is sort of beginner level stuff. So, is AI any use as a tool for history? Firstly, yes. I think as a tool for discovering material and brainstorming ideas, it has the potential to be very helpful to scholars and historians. It has also made some attempt at stylized prose, which certainly helps with flow. It still has many drawbacks. Firstly, I think the temptation for students and scholars to lazily throw together material using AI instead of using their own talents and attempting to develop them will be too tempting for many people and is open to malpractices. Scholars, then, must lead by example, not be tempted away from doing the hard graft of history by the convenience of artificial intelligence. Secondly, it is prone to errors. and as limited to whatever information it can scavenge online. It seems to have not used the scholarly works of Constance Head, the recent detailed book by Peter Crawford, or more recent historiographical thought behind the reign of Justinian II to inform its essay. Its provision of primary sources and scholarship is helpful, but is still limited in scope. It has only mentioned a few of the main primary sources, and has clearly struggled with the more obscure entries. Furthermore, most of the scholarship it used are from general works. It has welded together material which might be obsolete, and so cannot present the advances in historiography, but simply the more out-of-date material that it can scrounge for online. In contrast, HI can use his or her depth of knowledge to provide a fuller, up-to-date understanding of Justinian II, much like what Peter Crawford did in recent years. Lastly, beyond speed, what does this précis say that is not already in Wikipedia? It seemingly fulfills the same roles, but is different in form. Ultimately, I think AI, used as a tool for brainstorming or helping develop ideas, is its real unique use at the moment. In much the same way as electricity was invented long before it could be harnessed to be used in a light bulb, I also think artificial intelligence has a long way to go before its true value as a tool rather than as a magic trick is discovered. And this has been Eastern Roman History.